Jane Poole-Wilson is joining us to talk about going back into the Legislative Council as such, because you are the only one of the 15 that has experience. Were you surprised that the other people didn't stand, by the way? You know, the restand or
I don't know. You'd have to ask them, because I think yes, if you've been doing the role and enjoying it, and you feel you've got something left to give, then probably you would want to stand again. So.
Okay. Well, you got this extra benefit, I suppose. I mean, you've seen it in action.
Mm-hmm.
Did it live up to what it said on the packaging?
I think it's really interesting, actually, because I've been watching the candidates who've come forward this time, and obviously they're talking about the fact that, you know, they're trying to imagine the role, and I think I was a little bit in that position as well, where you can read all about it and you can observe it and you can have your ideas about what you think it will entail, but actually then doing it, you know, does it match up? I think broadly, yes, it does. I expected it to be interesting, and it's endlessly interesting. I expected there to be a lot of work involved around the legislation and scrutiny in detail, and definitely there's been that as well.
Your background obviously helped on that, did it?
Yes.
The lawyer side of things?
Yes.
Is that what it is? You're sitting there going through paragraphs and paragraphs?
Some of it is that, for sure. You know, when you have a bill, a piece of legislation, or you have, for example, if you look at a Tynwald order paper, you've got secondary legislation there, but you've also got detailed reports and so on. So you are reading a lot and absorbing the information, but also I think actually proactively thinking about it as well. You know, what does this mean? What will the impact be? So there's a lot of reading, but there's a lot of thinking. And I think as well, to do it justice, you know, there's a lot of discussion that should happen as well between politicians, between members of the Legislative Council and Tynwald.
What was the boys' club like? I mean, you know, it won't be that this time, by the looks of it, whatever happens, but it's be unlikely.
Well, it's unlikely on the numbers of women candidates. I actually think that the members of the Legislative Council were welcoming, and for me, going in without ever having been in Tynwald before, I've also found the MHKs very welcoming. So I've had a really positive experience, I think, of being able to interact not only with members of the Legislative Council, but working with members of the Keys as well.
Any tricky bits in your time, or your legislation that you had to really think hard about?
Yes, actually. The very first thing that came up at the Legislative Council was a very short bill. It was the Police Detention and Bail Bill. And it was to correct something in our law that to keep pace with some changes that had happened in the UK. But the challenge was that we were going to make the change retrospective, which is a very, very rare thing to do and really should never be done lightly. And I had the time at that point, but I did take a lot of time to look at what had happened in the UK, where this change had come from, how we were dealing with it here, and really think through so that you get to a point where when you're debating that piece of legislation and then you're voting on it, you are absolutely clear in your mind about why you would vote for or against something.
I'm guessing, again, your lawyer's side of you was involved in that because of it being law and legal issues. Yeah?
Well, definitely, because it was about it has an impact on citizens' lives, because it was about the police's ability to detain people and for how long and when the clock, the time limits start and stop. So. It has a real impact on people's lives, but also I think, you know, my background, I was interested in the underlying act, how it operates, also the debates in the UK and here about why the change was being made in the way it was.
How did you do with the abortion bill? Because, I mean, there you go, you've been dealing with that.
Yes, well, I mean, it's interesting because in the Legislative Council, at this point, the Legislative Council hasn't actually started work on the bill. But of course, there has been a huge amount of information. I mean, Dr. Aronson has been superb at briefing and sharing information, and obviously there's been a lot of information coming in from other interested parties as well. So certainly I've been reading everything, I've been following the debates in the Keys. I was very interested in the clauses debate that we had earlier this week, and I think there will be a very important job for the Legislative Council.
The new Legislative Council,
the new Legislative
which will be
Council,
interesting.
Absolutely.
One of the biggest things they're going to have to deal with straight away.
Yes, it will be. It will be.
So, where do you go from here? Are you going to be a career politician? Do you want to be an MHK? I have to ask everyone that. I mean, or you're just happy where you are doing what you're doing?
Well, I mean, I had previously, even before standing last time, thought about standing as an MHK, and actually Daphne Kane had approached me and asked me about considering the role on Legislative Council. Having done the role, I do feel like my particular skill set and abilities is well suited to what I see as the role of a member of the Legislative Council, which is why I'm standing again and why I would be quite keen to carry on.
And you see a future for the Legislative Council?
Oh,
Any
definitely.
changes, public voting, anything like that?
I mean, I really do understand this difficulty about almost the democratic deficit, that feeling that the public would like to be able to have a say in who gets onto the Legislative Council. But I think Lord Lisvane does make a good point that it is difficult, if you accept that Legislative Council is a secondary chamber and a revising chamber, what you don't want is to set up a conflict between the primacy of the keys and the secondary role of the council. And I think there is a danger with a public election. How do you overcome that potential tension between Legco members with perhaps a bigger share of the vote, a more recent mandate? How would that be managed?
Well, no one's got an answer to that one at the minute.
No.
Funny, when you stood last time, I think you said you would be doing some private work. This time you said it didn't work out. You were too busy?
I didn't do any. So, yes.
Was it because you were too busy?
Yes, because getting into the role, I mean, I chair the newly established Justice Committee. Through that, I'm also on the Public Accounts Committee. I've had a seat on our Library Provisions Committee. I've got I've had the role as Equality Champion.
Are you not a department?
No, not in
a
department. Well, my take, having been Equality Champion, is that I think there's a really interesting role for members of the Legislative Council working cross-departmentally. So that role is partly about helping to implement a government policy, the Equality Act, but it's also partly about being that sort of scrutineer, that critical friend, in terms of not being embedded in a particular department, but working across the piece to look at how government is implementing this particular aspect of its programme for government.
Do you get that financial lift if you're not in a department?
No, you don't.
So you're doing all these other things, but
Yes.
you're not getting the extra money. So isn't that almost an incentive to try and get a department?
No, I do believe that it's very important that members of the Legislative Council are used appropriately within our Parliament. So, I mean, Tynwald supported the idea that Legco members should be in departments, and I think there is a role, particularly where people have maybe skills and experience that are very pertinent to that department, and there's definitely something that needs doing, and that person is the right person. So I think, one of our challenges is, in a perfect world, I suppose, if you were all about principles, you would say Legco members stay out of being in departments and do the scrutiny role, But we are 33 members with full government to do, and to some extent, when we need to make use of people's particular skills and so on, we need to think about how best to deploy those for the good of government, Parliament and ultimately the Isle of Man. So I think I don't think it's necessarily a good idea for all members of the Legislative Council to be directly in department roles. I think where you are in a department, you have to be very mindful of how that impacts the primary scrutiny role.
How are you doing your expenses? Did you spend all your expenses in that sense? What's your take on this?
My personal take from my experience so far is that I'm not sure that members of the Legislative Council might need expenses in the way that.
But you'd like a lift in the salary
members
instead?
I think my personal view is that in the pay review that's coming up, we need to be very clear about the different roles of members of Tynwald. MHKs and MLCs have a basic parliamentary role, but MHKs have a constituency workload over and above that. Now, that's not to say MLCs don't also get involved in individual matters. I mean, I certainly have, but I'm not sure it's on the same scale as an MHK's regular diet, if you like, of their constituents approaching them. And then I think we have to look at overlaying that basic parliamentary role. What are the other things that people are bringing in terms of enhanced scrutiny, in terms of perhaps departmental or executive responsibility?
So more pay, right?
I think it's about making sure the pay is transparent and we're all clear about what the roles are and what the pay is for.